Obviously, some Southerners were racist, and that's how the South justified slavery. But as certain African Americans, like Fredrich Douglass, came to prominence, the old arguments that blacks are subhuman wasn't working anymore. Therefore, what's interesting is to see how Southerners developed rather intricate arguments once it became apparent they were oppressing human beings. I also want to explain the connection of slavery to modern-day capitalism, and how people justify modern-day capitalism as it becomes obviously immoral. A quick take here, too, on the psychological for anybody that's heard of the Milgram experiment. Once somebody realizes they are doing harm, people are going to justify their actions post hoc and continue what they are doing rather than confront their own guilt. There was no single argument, of course. Many people found different ways of reconciling their own guilt. One argument wasn't to justify slavery at all. Some folks admitted that slavery was bad. Their argument was that abolitionist radicals were changing society too fast, and therefore society would crumble because of such rapid change. This is the conservative worldview still seen in the world today. Sarah Day O'Connor was famous because she thought change should only ever be incremental, and too much change would create a societal collapse. Change to conservatives of this type is like removing a brick from a Jenga tower. Tradition is very important. What exists evolves slowly over time, and therefore can only be changed, if at all, slowly. Another defense was a frontal attack on the notion that human beings have any rights at all. It's thought that if freedom is to exist, it must be balanced with order, and that order is to be maintained by a certain caste system. Social mobility, according to this worldview, is chaotic and therefore a rigid society. And therefore, a rigid society creates a firm foundation on which a prosperous society can emerge. Both feudalism and fascism share this worldview. From the Southern perspective, this made sense. After all, white Southerners were among the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in the world, and wealth and power justified the tremendous human rights abuses they engaged in to bring it about. It's a sort of ends justifies the means argument. You must have a labor system, they would argue, for great people in society to emerge. Some people need to do the work so that others can do the thinking. Probably the most powerful argument, however, was this: evil is an inherent part of the world. There is no world without evil. To say something is evil is simply to say that it is a product of the world. Some people look on the very notion of the Constitution that all men are created equal as absurd. Rather, slave owners would say this is a sentimental farce. It is nearer to the truth to say that all men are not born equal, and the only thing we can say for certain is that man is born helpless and dependent. And from that last part, you can see, at the very least, a defense of peonage. The slave owners clothed the slaves, fed the slaves, and are therefore owed something from the slaves, just as a child is dutiful to the mother and father who raised it. Therefore, when looking at economic reasons for slavery, the benefit at least it gives to at least some members of society, and the detrimental effects of ending such a long-held practice overnight, many Southerners who were not even defending the ethics of slavery were prepared to fight for it. What's interesting to me is that all of these arguments can and will be used in defense of capitalism. Just as people asked how a society can be just when one part lives off of another, this same question is going to be asked regarding capitalism. Just as people asked how any child could be born into slavery, so some people are asking how any child can be born into poverty. You're going to see the same defenses as we saw earlier. Now, I've talked a lot about fascism, and while the Confederacy wasn't a fascist state, it did lay the groundwork. A fascist state is a dictatorship, while the Confederacy was an oligarchy. It's a subtle difference, to be sure, the difference between North Korea and China. With Donald Trump, a new Confederacy would be made up, I think, of dictators. Donald Trump primed Southerners and conservatives for an autocracy. Autocracy comes about when a people are very desperate. The first Civil War came about because Southern states were very powerful, whereas if there is a second armed conflict, it will be because of desperation. Now, unless Ron DeSantis has his way, and in the next 10 or 20 years the South can rearm itself, we won't see an actual war. What I do fear happening is an insurgency, like the troubles in Ireland or the Middle East, or the conflict the Mexican government has with the cartels. Obviously not something anybody should shrug off. But what I'm saying is that these people will not be able to fight with tanks. They won't be able to acquire things of that sort. It will instead be like the KKK on steroids. Now, we did just crack down hard on the fascist thugs of Charlottesville, and I think that will buy us some time, as will the COVID virus that's rampaging through conservative ranks. However, I don't think that will stop them completely. Fascists can be adaptable. Some fascists are going to take the vaccine, and as more and more die off, some will realize, hey, vaccines work, without changing their entire worldview. When the beer hall putsch failed, Hitler didn't figure, well, maybe what he thought was wrong, but he thought that attacking democracy directly was wrong. Secondly, we have a far-right Supreme Court and a weakling president. Those two in conjunction will allow fascists to rebuild themselves. Fascists will continue to fearmonger about cartels south of the border. One of the big reasons Hitler came to power was fear of the Soviet Union, and no doubt conservatives are still trying to fearmonger about communism. But without a boogeyman like the Soviets, I'm not sure that's an effective target. As China becomes more powerful, it will be. But for right now, what seems to be working for them is an attack on immigration, and a fear that the demographics of this country are changing, and that along with it, crime will rise and poverty because immigrants are lazy and conversely criminal. What is going to happen in the North? If history is any indication, we will hopefully grow increasingly liberal. If we look at what happened prior to the Civil War, the South kept trying to expand its power. Liberals in the North became emboldened and galvanized. Progressives in the North were able to portray the South as the power-hungry villains that they were. A similar thing happened in Europe prior to World War II. As Nazi power rose, people's fear of them grew alongside it. People like Neville Chamberlain were seen increasingly as weak and stupid. And that's why I am a strong advocate for keeping Biden in power, while simultaneously taking control of local governments so that when our moment comes, we can assume control.